Thanks for joining us. I'm Allison Dvorak, and I'm joined by Chris Blancardi and Christina Croto. We are registered dietitians at Senior Resources Agency on Aging, and we're going to chat today about the new dietary guidelines and how they may impact the senior nutrition program and aging adults in our region. So the new dietary guidelines came out, and probably a lot of people saw them. And one of the big things that stands out is the picture. It's different than years past. Chris, what do you think about what this image portrays?
The picture itself is a new pyramid, whereas we transitioned from something called My Plate. Prior to My Plate, there was the old food pyramid. And so the idea was that it's to be turned on its head. So now it's at a point where the food is kind of everywhere. There's no delineations. So we do have general categories for protein, dairy, healthy fats. We have vegetables and fruits, and then we have whole grains. It's a pyramid where the biggest part at the top is going to be the most commonly chosen foods, and then less and less so as you get to the bottom where it's thinnest. The illustration itself is supposed to, the picture is supposed to represent the literature. And so I think we'll kind of have to go into how this relates and doesn't relate to what actually is said in the guidelines.
Christina, what do you think?
I think it's interesting. One thing that I noticed right off the bat was that whole grains is now the smallest portion on the pyramid, the upside down pyramid, which if you're familiar with the food pyramid that we used to have in the 90s and the early 2000s, it was the largest. It was the part on the bottom of the pyramid. And that protein has moved its way up to the top. I do like that there is plant-based protein on there, so that's good that they're including all sorts of different proteins and things like that.
I think that's kind of the interesting thing about this, is that it's not really necessarily showing the servings, number of servings of each item, or anything in that we've seen in other versions of the pyramid, and I do remember several of those. But it's something to think about, like the variety of foods that we need to eat, and I don't know, we're just going to dive deeper into all of these things. One thing that we did find was interesting about this is that these dietary guidelines are 9 pages to read. The previous ones were over 140 pages to read. And so, therefore, probably a lot of people did not read the 140 pages because it had all of the backup data and all of the science behind it, a lot of graphs,
we loved.
We read it, but maybe not everybody else did. And so this is something that's interesting, that maybe this is part of the on-purpose way of doing the dietary guidelines, so that more people actually read them and listen and learn. Because I think what we also see as a trend in the dietary guidelines is that we're always trying to make people's intake better, right? So where are we now, and how can we make it better going forward? So that's a lot of what, the things that are discussed here. So the first thing that's not a new concept, the eat the right amount for you. So Christina, what does that really mean for people?
So I'm actually really happy that this is like sort of at the forefront of the guidelines. It's, sort of starting off right at the bat so that everybody knows that, what is good for you and what's good for you may not be exactly what I need. And that nutrition is and should be individualized for everyone. And that's really good for us registered dietitians, because that really highlights the importance of the work that we do so that we can help people individually. And so I like that is at the forefront.
Yeah, no notes. It's pretty good. Just as statements themselves, they simplify things, and it doesn't have to be overcomplicated. So.
Right. And I think we're going to get to it later in the life stages, but people's body size is different, their activity level is different, their age, their growth, so dietary guidelines really are for people of all ages, from infancy up to, older adults. And so there are different needs along the way, but, just ballparking it, an older adult who is about 100 pounds generally would need around 1,100 to 1,200 calories if we were calculating at 25 kcal per kilogram. And then somebody who was 200 pounds, same idea, like a moderately mobile older adult at 25 calories per kilogram would be about 2,200 to 2,300
Okay.
calories. So just kind of like where we're looking at things on food labels, that's always comparing back to how does this fit into your whole day.
Mm-hmm.
So none of that has really changed in these newer dietary guidelines from where they were before. But one thing that I know is a great topic for Chris, because he loves protein, is the idea of prioritizing protein foods at every meal. So how does that impact especially older adults?
I think it's a good nutrient for them because of how it impacts overall function due to it keeping your skeletal muscle on, and we don't want to experience muscle wasting as we age. And if you're somebody who has a lessened appetite, like, you know, an older adult would be a good example. Somebody who's on medications that causes them to have a lessened appetite would also benefit from prioritizing protein at a meal. That doesn't mean add more protein. It just means eat the protein part first on the plate.
Right.
So that helps, because if you're not going to finish the whole plate, at least you've had that important component.
Yes.
To
I
preserve your muscle
tell
mass.
my clients that a lot.
Yeah.
Eat that first.
Yeah. And I think what we see with some older adults is the tea and toast syndrome, kind of where people nibble on tea and toast, and that's not something that's providing any protein. So I like the idea of making sure that you think about that protein. So even if you're having toast, you know, putting some peanut butter on it, right?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Other than, you know, having a condition like maybe a kidney condition where you need to actually monitor and you do need to pay attention to how much protein and not overload yourself with protein, you know, that would be the only thing that I would sort of like pay attention to, is if you do have like a kidney condition or something where you need to monitor the amount of protein that you're
Then they might want to see a dietitian.
and
Yeah,
then you
hopefully
might wanna
it's
see a
it's
dietitian.
covered by Medicare. So I think that that's an interesting point too. In a lot of things, it's a good thing when you're eating the right amount of it, but it can be a bad thing if you eat
Too much.
And there's no like forever and ever eat, you know, as much of this as possible, and it's not going to possibly be a bad thing. But protein is definitely a crucial component of our bodies, and so we do have to consume it. There's lots of ways to consume protein too. I mean, I know, you know, I'm not a vegetarian, so when I'm thinking about planning a meal, I typically think of the meat item first. You know, what am I going to cook for dinner tonight? Oh, chicken. And then I think about what am I going to have on with it? You know, the sides, the vegetable, the potato, or you know, whatever. And I think that if we have that as our thought process when we're thinking about what we're going to have for a meal, then we are prioritizing our protein. So even somebody who is vegetarian, they do need to consider, okay, if I'm eating that salad, am I going to put some nuts and seeds on it? Am I going to put some beans on it? How am I going to get some protein
into
that
yeah.
meal as well? Yeah, so I think that's a nice thing for people. And again, you know, little calculations for that 100-pound person or the 200-pound person, it's about 54 to 72 grams of protein for the 100-pound person total for the day at these newer, slightly higher recommendations, and 109 to 146 grams protein for that 200-pound person.
That's where I'm at too.
Yeah. So it's actually something that is achievable if you're eating foods that are high in protein, like eggs and dairy products and meats and beans and nuts and seeds. But you do have to think about it. You know, you do have to make sure that you're incorporating it.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I think it's something that, you know, we talk a lot about what are achievable goals, and I think those are achievable still.
It's
I don't
1.2
think
to
that
1.6
Yes,
grams.
I think that's achievable.
Yeah.
For most people.
Yes, exactly.
Especially
as long
our
as you think
seniors.
about it, as long as you're not doing the tea and toast, you know, two meals out of the day. All right. So the next recommendation is to consume dairy. Very simple statement, right?
Consume dairy, which yes, that has been pretty consistent over the years. You know, even back in like the 40s when these guidelines were first coming out, not in the same way that they are now, but dairy has always been in the guidelines. It's always been there. It provides a lot of really great nutrients that our bodies need, especially as we age. calcium and protein. It also can include some fats. You know, we talk a lot about, over the years, it's been don't drink whole milk, drink skim milk, don't drink skim milk, drink whole milk. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's kind of like this is another one of those instances where, you know, what are your needs? Do you need a little bit more fat in your diet, or do you need a little bit less and more protein? Do you prefer, did you grow up on whole milk? Did you grow up on skim milk? So what are your taste preferences? So this is something, it is another category where you just have to individualize to your needs.
Yeah, all these are definitely individual, because the guidelines are meant as, you know, overall steering somebody in a direction, whereas it's not meant to police what you eat every single day. Mm-hmm. But this can give you the idea. So I think you brought up the idea that full fat dairy, if that's something that helps you to meet your dairy goal, because there's a 3 serving per day type of goal here, then that's your thing. But yeah, if somebody else wants to have the low fat or skim, that's also a good option. Mm-hmm. It's up to your preference, kind of.
And sometimes we have people that have a chronic disease issue like cardiovascular disease or something, and really then they really need to watch out for all of the amount of fat, so we use caution there. But there's so many more products out on the market now, the whole fat yogurts, and then the whole fat milk, and especially for children or people that aren't consuming a lot, again, that's a great way of getting in calories. One of the cautionary things on the guidelines here is to be mindful of added sugars. So that's something that we do see a lot, especially in the yogurts and the flavored milk products. They do in those versions, they can end up with a lot of added sugars. So better to keep it as simple as possible, mm-hmm. And add your own flavorings, fruit, seasoning, you know, whatever you want to.
That's the prevalent message too throughout this. So in protein and then in the dairy section that we just read, they both have a message about no added sugars.
Yeah. Awesome. So now we're getting back into the home territory of eating vegetables and fruits throughout the day. This is definitely something that's been a part of dietary guidelines for a long time. One thing that we noticed when we were chatting about this, Chris, I love that vegetables come first in the statement, right? So it kind of rolls off the tongue to say fruits and vegetables, but now we're actually trying to maybe wordsmith that a little bit and say vegetables first, because the vegetables are really the fruit's not a bad guy or anything, but vegetables are definitely more important. But why don't you talk a little bit about that?
We've always abbreviated F and V, you know? So this is a good way to shift the mindset, because of the fact that vegetables are going to be beneficial in the sense that throughout these guidelines, I think that there is a de-emphasis on sugar, whether that's added sugar or just overall an abundance of carbohydrates. So starting with vegetables, fruits are not the bad guy, as you said, mm-hmm. but starting with vegetables on the mind is a good way to think about it.
Yeah, I love that they address that here, because it's really important to address the average American. Not everybody has access or the budget to always purchase fresh or organic vegetables and fruits. And when you really take a look at it, canned and frozen vegetables and fruits, really nutrient wise of the actual fruit and vegetable, it's negligible. So they are a great way to get those fruits and vegetable servings in every day. So I love that they included that. The only thing about the canned is that because they need to be shelf stable. For vegetables, they add a lot of sodium, and for fruits, a lot of times they are canned in like a sugar water or a syrup. So we just need to be mindful of that and just sort of get out the messaging to sort of rinse those fruits and vegetables once they come out of the can. Maybe we could have added a little blurb in that.
Yeah.
But other than that,
frozen and canned work for a lot of our older adults. Even though we love we participate with the Senior Farmers Market nutrition program and the Department of Agriculture and all of our local farmers, that's great. But here in Connecticut, we don't grow stuff year round.
Right.
So there's always going to be a need for getting those vegetables and fruits in alternate forms at different times of the year, and mix and match.
And they're
sometimes you
used to
chop
it.
up one thing and use other frozen items in with it or something. So
Yes.
it's a great way to incorporate color. And as we were saying on the protein items, sometimes you could eat almost too much. Vegetables are a little bit self-limiting because of the fiber. You feel so full, it's really hard to eat
And they're full of water
too many of them,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So can't go wrong with more vegetables and fruits. So the next one coming up is incorporating healthy fats, kind of the opposite end of vegetables and fruits, but not really. Some of those vegetables are those healthy fats. So Christina, what do you think on healthy fats? What are they? How can we do more of them?
So your healthy fats are your unsaturated fats, your mono, your poly.
What does that mean?
And those are fats that are gonna not stick in your arteries as much. And so your saturated fats are gonna be the ones that are like sticky. So if you think of
Animal-based,
like
right?
saturated sticky as a way to help you remember. And so you wanna like have more of your healthy fats because those are really, you need fat for your body. It's just better to have the healthy fat versus the saturated fat. I like that the guidelines are consistent from what they've been over the past however many years, to not exceed 10% of your total daily calories in saturated fats. I think that's really important. List here that, it says limiting highly processed foods will help you meet your saturated fat goals. We could talk about fried foods there, because that is a large component. It's a little bit more specific than highly processed foods, because highly processed foods could be a lot of things. In terms of the healthy fat recommendations, I love all of the recommendations there. I do think that we could add seed oils. Seed oils are a great way to get your unsaturated fats, your healthy fats, and there isn't really like a ton listed there, so I would include that.
They said healthy fats and included nuts and seeds, but then in the next bullet down, they're talking about essential fatty acids, which I think seed oils would fit the bill completely.
Exactly.
But instead they put olive oil.
Olive oil doesn't give you as much of the essential fatty acids, which are your omega-3s and your omega-6s.
And Chris, you had a tip on cooking with different oils to watch out for.
Just very much watching out. Every oil has a sort of different smoke point, changing the fatty acid composition into more trans fats, which are definitely not good for the heart health. So I would highly recommend that. And the same thing goes for fast food, where you get something, or fried food, as you mentioned, because if it's in the fryer for a long period of time, that oil is being heated for a very long time. And so these compounds are building in that case scenario too.
And I think, one point we wanted to make too is that even when there's healthier fats and less healthy fats, they all have the same amount of calories. So they all add up pretty quickly as far as adding to your overall calorie intake. So we want to be mindful of that. The next thing, the next dietary guideline is to focus on whole grains. And Chris, what are your thoughts on whole grains and how can we find them?
I'm so glad I got this question because I love fiber. Where can we find them? Look for different things like bread. You're gonna look at the back of the package and look at the ingredients. You're gonna find the first word's gonna be whole. Whatever it may be, because there's more than just wheat as a grain. So you might see, whole wheat. You might see whole rye, for instance, any kind of grain it may be. The other telltale sign would be the fact that it has fiber in it. So fiber is your friend. It is like a friend. It visits, it leaves, but you're better off for the visit.
Takes out the trash.
Yeah, isn't that nice?
I'm glad you mentioned that about it's more than just wheat. I would love to see that little first bullet point. It just says prioritize fiber-rich whole grains. Maybe add a couple of examples. What are those whole grains? Your quinoa, your barley, your oats, things like that, so that people understand, okay, what is a whole grain? Yeah,
it's not just one aisle in the grocery store. There's the bread section, and then there's an actual section with grains in it, with your different rices and other things.
Brown rice, all that good stuff. So I would say that would be a nice little
add to it.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely.
And could we go back to the food pyramid part of where this food pyramid, and if I could illustrate, it has the whole grains at the very bottom, which sort of implies you want to have at least the least amount, so it's very tiny as a section, but the focus should be whole grains. And I'm not sure that what we're getting from the graphic really is emphasizing that point
I
in
agree.
an accurate sense.
Well, I think when we get back to that, that idea of prioritizing protein in the meal and the previous guidelines being half your plate, it is shifting a little bit away from the amount of grains that or the starchy items that we're eating. So 2 to 4 servings is a great amount. Like you don't have to feel limited. You can eat a sandwich. You can have some pasta. You can
some
have
rice.
these things, right? But it doesn't mean that you're making your whole plate that. From a food industry perspective, we're seeing more and more whole grain products on the market. So when you go to the store, you can actually find a variety of things. You can find whole grain pasta. You can find whole grain rice, options more than, you don't have to go to like the organic type stores to
Yes.
find these things. And I think that it's more, as people are looking for it more, there will be more options. So if you go out to a restaurant and you're ordering a sandwich and they, do you want it on white or wheat? You could be like, is it whole wheat?
Yeah.
Or is it whole grain white?
Will they know?
And if they know that people are looking for it that way, they will supply it.
Likely
So it is
supply it,
really,
yeah.
it really is up to all of us to be looking for those whole grains and when you're shopping at the grocery store to buy them, because a store is not going to keep things on the shelf if nobody buys it. This is another one of those areas where we like to see the food first philosophy, in that the whole grains have the fiber in them already, right? They don't need like a supplemental fiber something mixed into the recipe. Okay, and now we have the highly discussed item of limit highly processed foods, added sugars, and refined carbohydrates. We've kind of been touching on this, especially about the sugar and the impact of processed foods in our intake of things like fat and sugar and sodium, all the kind of the things that we're trying to avoid. So Christina, what's the deal on this highly processed foods?
I mean, so like you said, I think that really what they're trying to hone in on here is to reduce the intake of foods that have these added sugars, added fats, added salt, sodium, excuse me, is a really common component that we find in a lot of our foods because it's a preservative. And it's a way to keep foods on the shelf longer. We are registered dietitians, so we know that highly processed foods means, like, in any way is this food sort of manipulated.
Like your bread.
Like, and
someone
not
make
made in
that
your
bread
kitchen.
for you.
not made in your kitchen, and it's not just like a bell pepper.
Right.
It's something has been added or something has been changed. But unfortunately, a highly processed food can also be a really healthy whole grain bread. It is considered highly processed. So I think that the wording is a little confusing for the general public. That first sentence, it just says, avoid highly processed foods. So I think that just like a little bit more explanation could be good, especially when they're suggesting things like yogurt. The wording could be, while I understand that they're probably trying to keep the wording as simple and brief as possible, I think that, in something, a category such as this, it bears a little bit more explanation.
There's some components that aren't.
But will people notice is the question. Sometimes I wonder, what is the public sentiment about it, and will people catch these kind of things that we're catching?
Right.
Because I think as a dietitian, and just, I don't know, in my personal opinion as well, wording really matters. So if there's something left up to being ambiguous or being interpreted in more than different than the way you intended, I think it's your responsibility to clarify.
I think one of the big things that, is an easy takeaway from this is, again, the added sugars. And that's not anything new for the dietary guidelines. The dietary guidelines never said eat a bunch of sugar. But we've always said kind of like limit the amounts, but we also, as a population, we tend to like a sweet once in a while. You know, people like to eat a cookie.
That's human nature.
People have
Yeah.
birthday cake. You know, these are things that are part of our lives, but they've also kind of become everywhere. And I think that's the challenge, is that do we need sugar in our peanut butter? Do we need sugar in our ketchup? Do we need sugar in every piece of canned fruit? You know, does it have to be at those high levels? The drinks that are out there that people consume are, you know, crazy high in amounts of sugar, and you don't feel full from it, and you don't realize how many calories and how much sugar is in that, especially in the drinks. So I think if there's a good takeaway from this, is that we become more aware, and maybe we look at those labels to see how much added sugar is really in this, and would I do that myself?
Yeah.
You know, I shared the example the other day of, I looked at this iced tea lemonade drink, and I was like, wow, that looks like really, that'd be very tasty, right? It had 60 grams of sugar in it. And I mean, that's just a lot of sugar to drink.
And
I
you're a
wouldn't- I wouldn't-
dietitian,
I wouldn't
and
eat
you
that
are
much sugar.
surprised by that. And so think about, you know, the general public. Like, that is exactly right. Like, I think that, you know, things here that are listed are chips, cookies, candy. We already know that. You
Right.
need to be limiting those sorts of things. We should be opening our eye, or, you know, the general public's eyes to things like the yogurt, the iced teas, the other drinks that you're buying, bread, peanut butter, things like that you're mentioning. We should be highlighting those and helping people make better choices.
Now, another thing that we don't like to talk about as a population, but has also always been a part of the dietary guidelines, is to limit alcoholic beverages or avoid them entirely. There's nothing beneficial about them to you. Even though the Mediterranean diet has a picture of a glass of red wine, it just means that it's less bad, right? Like, I think that's the message that kind of becomes crazy here. But Chris, do you want to touch any more on?
This has got to be in here culturally. It's got to be because it's something that is just ubiquitous in our culture. I think that if we're focusing on benefits of alcohol, there wouldn't be any, and we could say, you know, completely avoid. There are actually clear limits on the previous dietary guidelines. So
No more than.
Yeah, no more than. We
Yeah.
could have changed it.
Well, this
back to
says
that.
consume less alcohol for better overall health, but I think we can just say our interpretation is
That's open to interpretation.
don't drink it if it's not already part of your life, and if it is part of your life, try to reduce. And I think that kind of goes along the same thing. The other component of this page is about the sodium. And, you know, I was sharing, since I'm a little more seasoned of a dietitian, that I recall the 4-gram sodium diet being kind of like the low sodium diet. And now the recommendations are that people should not consume more than 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day. That used to be considered like a very restrictive diet. So to some degree, I think it means maybe we've made progress as a population, that our normal intake of sodium is a little bit lower. But as we said, on these processed foods, it's sneaking in there. So
Yeah,
you have to watch
absolutely.
out for it. And also the fried foods that have the salt shaker poured on top.
Yeah.
There's a lot of.
Well, these are recommendations. I don't know if this is the regular intake of people.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes it could be that 4,000. I think that it can be both easy and very difficult to meet the 2,300 milligrams. It really depends on the choices you make throughout the day.
Yes,
It can be very easy to go over that with certain food choices.
certainly.
Yeah. Then the dietary guidelines go on to special populations and considerations, which is very interesting for people who have small children or infants, and the needs that they have as they're growing up and through life as a toddler, middle childhood, adolescence, adulthood, pregnant women, lactating women, and then we get to older adults. And again, we've really been focusing on those key nutrients that older adults need. That idea that prioritizing protein and prioritizing the really nutrient-dense foods like dairy or like the whole grains or the vegetables, because those are the things that are going to give our older adults those specific nutrients that they really need, and the fiber. And I wanted to highlight that our, we work very closely with the Senior Nutrition Program, which is through the Older Americans Act. And so part of that is that we need to follow these dietary guidelines for the meals that we plan for people. And the guidelines for the Senior Nutrition Program, which is like Meals on Wheels and meals that happen at senior centers, is that we should be providing about a third of what somebody would need from the dietary guidelines. And I looked at, some of our meal plans, and where we said before that somebody's calorie intake would be between 1,200 and like 2,400 or about that. A typical meal that's served at lunchtime in the senior nutrition program varies between 700 and 1,000 calories. So we're probably already providing a little bit more, a little cushion in case everybody doesn't eat every single
3 meals
bite,
a day.
And oftentimes I will hear that because I run a senior nutrition program.
Yeah.
I find that people who I talk to say they have this lunch, they might have skipped breakfast, or they do have breakfast and then they eat lunch and they have nothing else. Or the other way.
Yeah.
They skip breakfast, have this, and maybe something like a snack later.
It also has, quite a bit of protein, between 33 and 48 grams of protein, usually around 10 grams of fiber in some of the meals that I looked at, and just about 500 milligrams of sodium. So that's a nice low sodium way of eating a meal. But to your point, Chris, I think that some of the guidelines we've set here is, yes, come and have the senior nutrition program meal, but what else can they eat during the day that would kind of amp up their nutrition intake?
Those recommendations of what to eat, just be aware that you might not feel hungry as much because the sensual awareness of an older adult is less so than when we were younger. So less thirst, less hunger signals, but you still need to eat. And I think it's more of being mindful of having a little something, throughout your day. So
Keeps your energy up too.
It will keep your energy up.
Through the Older Americans Act, which always needs reauthorization, it is kind of a government thing as well, that provides this healthy, well-balanced meal to millions of seniors across the country, and it's for people who are age 60 and over. It's not an income-based program. It's really promoting people who are age 60 and over having the opportunity to have a healthy meal and to socialize and everything else. All the programs do ask for donations because the funding for it is not enough to keep it going, and so it is important if people can donate to donate. But the crux of it is really about promoting health and wellness for people, both physically and emotionally. And it's a really great program, I think, to help people along the way. And they get to talk with dietitians like us for nutrition education and counseling and all that kind of great stuff. So the dietary guidelines, I think, overall has some good points, but I think the one thing we wanted to maybe highlight is that the health recommendations and what it actually looks like in at least the senior nutrition program probably isn't that much different, because we were kind of doing good stuff all along.
Yeah, not too much different when it comes to our area with older adults.
Right. Yeah. Anything else from you, Christina?
Go see a dietitian.
Yeah.
We'll help you out.